A freighter carrying a crew of 29 disappeared on Lake Superior during a severe storm last night, and so far, no survivors have been found. The freighter, the Edmund Fitzgerald, was transporting iron ore when it ran into high winds and 25-foot waves.
The SS Edmund Fitzgerald was a giant, the pride of the Great Lakes. Launched in 1958, she was the largest freighter to ever sail the inland seas. Stretching 729 feet long, longer than 2 football fields, the ship was a marvel of engineering. Her massive hull could carry over 26,000 tons of iron ore, making her the workhorse of the lakes. For years, she dominated the waterways, hauling cargo from the iron ore mines in Minnesota to the steel mills in Detroit. But on November 10, 1975, the Edmund Fitzgerald disappeared. It wasn't just a ship sinking, it was an event that shook the world. The Fitzgerald vanished into the stormy waters of Lake Superior, taking with her all 29 crew members. No distress call, no survivors, no bodies were ever found. The ship, once thought unsinkable, had been swallowed by the lake in a matter of hours. For years, the world has wondered what really happened that night. What could cause such a mighty ship to disappear without a trace? For nearly 50 years, the cause remained a mystery. The official report pointed to a series of massive waves that flooded the Fitzgerald, causing it to break apart and sink. But many people, including the families of the lost crew, didn't believe it. There were too many unanswered questions. How could such a sturdy vessel just disappear in calm waters? How could a ship known for her strength and resilience be torn apart so easily? The mystery of the Edmund Fitzgerald has haunted historians, divers, and the families of the crew for decades. But now, a breakthrough has occurred. A team of experts recently deployed an underwater drone to the site where the Fitzgerald sank, nearly 530 feet beneath the surface of Lake Superior. Equipped with 4K cameras and advanced sonar, the drone was sent to capture new footage of the wreckage. What it found wasn't just surprising, it was terrifying. As the drone descended into the depths, the team on the surface watched in awe. The feed came to life, slowly revealing the dark, murky waters of Lake Superior. The deeper it went, the clearer the wreckage became. There, in the shadows of the lake, was the Edmund Fitzgerald, twisted, broken, but still intact in some ways. It was like seeing a ghost. The first thing the drone revealed was the state of the ship's bow. The footage showed the massive ship's front half resting upright, partially buried in the mud. The stern, however, was a different story. It had flipped upside down, detached from the rest of the vessel, and was scattered some distance away. It was a shocking sight. How could a ship of that size and strength break into 2 pieces? The footage wasn't grainy or blurry like some of the previous dives. This time, the camera was crystal clear, capturing every detail of the wreck in high definition. The team couldn't believe what they were seeing. They had heard the stories, read the reports, and seen the pictures of the wreck, but nothing compared to the footage from the drone. The Fitzgerald was far more damaged than they had imagined. The hull was twisted, the metal bent at unnatural angles, and the deck was covered in a thick layer of silt. The footage clearly showed the destructive force of the waves that had torn the ship apart. It didn't look like the ship had been slowly flooded. No, it looked as though something had torn into the hull, causing immediate and violent damage. As the drone moved closer to the wreck, the control room fell silent. The images on the screen told a story far more complicated than anyone had expected. The Fitzgerald didn't just sink, something had happened to it before it went down. The damage to the bow was not just the result of water rushing in. It was as if the ship had been torn apart by an external force. The question on everyone's mind was, what had caused this? Was it simply the force of the storm, or was there something more at play? The camera zoomed in on a particular section of the hull. The footage clearly showed a massive dent in the side of the ship. Something had struck it. The damage was deep, with sharp edges that were not consistent with normal storm damage. The hull wasn't just bent. It looked as though it had been hit by something. The drone operators stared at the footage, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. This wasn't just the ship breaking apart from the inside. Something had pierced the hull from the outside. What could cause that kind of damage to a ship like the Edmund Fitzgerald? The operator's heart raced as the drone moved closer to the bow. The footage showed signs of stress on the ship's structure, as though it had been under immense pressure. The question loomed larger than ever. Was it a natural force, like a rogue wave, or had something else happened? Was the ship struck by something, or was there a structural flaw that caused the Fitzgerald to break apart so suddenly? The team watched as the drone hovered over the cargo hold, and that's when they noticed something even more chilling. The hatches, which had been a major point of debate in the original investigations, appeared to be intact. The hatches weren't ripped off or torn open, as many had suggested. They were still in place, secured tightly to the deck. This was a critical moment. Had the Fitzgerald sunk because of faulty hatch covers, as the official report had suggested, or was there something else at play? The drone continued to move deeper into the wreck, slowly uncovering more details. The ship's deck was in disarray, with large pieces of equipment and machinery scattered across the lake floor. Some of the equipment appeared to be intact, while others had been damaged beyond recognition. It was clear that the damage to the ship wasn't just from a storm. Something had caused the Fitzgerald to break apart, and the pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together. The drone continued its descent, exploring more of the wreckage as the team on the surface followed every movement closely. The clearer the footage became, the more it became apparent. The damage to the Edmund Fitzgerald was not just the result of waves and weather. It was far worse. The ship, so proud and so strong in its prime, had been torn apart by something violent, something unexplainable. What had caused the Fitzgerald's mighty hull to break in half? What had created the massive dents in the metal? The questions were piling up, but the drone's footage was providing some answers that no one was prepared for. As the drone maneuvered deeper into the wreck, it moved closer to the stern, where the damage was far more extensive than anyone had imagined. The footage was staggering. The stern of the ship was upside down, scattered and mangled, as if it had been violently ripped from the rest of the vessel. The pieces were strewn across the lakebed in a wide debris field. This wasn't just a case of the ship sinking. It was as if something had struck the Fitzgerald with a force so great that the stern had been torn away from the bow. The operator zoomed in on a large piece of the stern structure. It was clear from the footage that the metal had been twisted, almost like paper being crumpled in a fist. But what could have done this to a ship of such size? The Fitzgerald was built to withstand the roughest of storms on Lake Superior, yet here it was, broken into pieces. The ship had not simply sunk from flooding, it had been violently torn apart. The footage didn't just focus on the wreck itself, though. It also showed the surrounding lakebed, where the scattered pieces of the ship lay. The silt and debris covered parts of the wreck, making it hard to make out every detail. But as the drone moved forward, something disturbing became visible. Small, jagged pieces of metal, like shards of broken glass, were scattered all around the wreck. The team couldn't help but wonder, was this the result of a violent explosion? Something had caused the Fitzgerald to break apart so rapidly, and this scattering of wreckage seemed to suggest that an explosion or immense force had played a part. The team watched as the drone moved closer to the wreck's midsection. Here, the damage was even more difficult to ignore. As the camera moved through the debris, the footage showed large, twisted beams, once part of the ship's structure, now bent and bent again in a direction that made no sense. It was as though something had grabbed the ship and crushed it from the inside. The metal was deformed in ways that suggested a force much stronger than simple flooding. Could it have been the waves that caused this? Or was there something else entirely? At this point, the team realized that the damage wasn't just the result of the ship being battered by waves. There was something else at play. The footage was showing clear signs of stress on the ship's structure, but the damage didn't match the conventional theory of a sinking due to bad weather. The shape of the wreck, the way it had been twisted and broken, all pointed to something much more destructive. But what could that be? The team continued to watch as the drone moved toward the cargo holds. The original investigations had blamed faulty hatch covers for allowing water to flood the ship's holds, causing it to break apart, but the drone's footage told a different story. The hatches, which had been the focus of so much attention in the past, were still in place. They hadn't been torn off, they were secured tightly to the deck, as they should have been. This discovery raised new questions. If the hatch covers were secure, why did the ship break apart so violently? Why did the Fitzgerald sink so quickly? The crew had no time to react, no distress signals were sent, no lifeboats were launched. Was it really just faulty hatch covers, or was there something more? The drone's camera moved across the wreck, revealing more disturbing signs. As it zoomed in on the ship's deck, the footage showed large sections of the ship's equipment and machinery scattered across the lake floor. Some pieces appeared to be intact, while others had been completely destroyed. The state of the ship's deck was chaotic, a far cry from the well-organized and secure vessel that had once sailed proudly on Lake Superior. But the most disturbing thing was how the wreck was scattered. Large sections of the ship, including equipment and parts of the hull, were torn apart in a way that suggested a massive, forceful impact. The footage now showed pieces of machinery that had been ripped away from the ship and scattered far from the wreck. It was clear that something had torn these parts away. This wasn't the result of a simple sinking. This was a violent, catastrophic event that had caused the Fitzgerald to break apart, and no one knew why. The team on the surface was in shock. How could something like this happen to a ship that had been so carefully designed, so well built? The Fitzgerald had been considered unsinkable, yet now it was a broken wreck at the bottom of the lake. As the drone hovered over the wreck, the camera moved toward the ship's bow again. The sight that appeared on the screen sent another wave of shock through the control room. The bow, while partially buried in the mud, was still relatively intact, but the damage here was far more than just superficial. The hull was dented, with deep gouges on both sides, and there were signs of cracks running along the ship's framework. Something had caused the Fitzgerald to endure immense stress before it sank. But what? The footage left the team with more questions than answers. What could have caused the Fitzgerald to break apart so violently? The drone continued to reveal more of the wreckage, and with every passing moment, the team on the surface grew more uncertain. The Fitzgerald's destruction wasn't just due to flooding, it was a violent, almost deliberate shattering of a ETA ship once known for its strength. The deeper the drone explored, the clearer it became that something catastrophic had occurred to this mighty freighter. No longer could they dismiss the idea that the ship had just been caught in a storm. The wreckage was telling a different story, one of mystery and potential sabotage. The footage zoomed in on the cargo holds again. These were the areas that had initially been blamed for the Fitzgerald sinking. The theory was that the ship's hatch covers had failed, allowing water to pour into the holds and weigh the ship down. But what the drone revealed shattered that theory. The hatches, which had been the focus of so much debate, were still intact. They weren't torn off, nor were they damaged. They were securely fastened, just as they should have been. This discovery was a huge turning point. If the hatches were in place, then what had caused the ship to sink so quickly? Why had the Fitzgerald broken apart so violently? The team on the surface was stunned. They had always believed that the hatches were the issue, but the drone footage was pointing to something far more complex. It raised a crucial question. If the ship wasn't sinking from water flooding in through the hatches, what exactly was tearing it apart? The camera moved along the ship's broken hull, focusing on the twisted and bent sections. The steel wasn't just bent, it was shredded, as though some immense force had clawed its way through the ship. The operator focused on the areas around the cargo holds. This wasn't just the result of waves slamming into the ship. This looked like damage caused by an explosive force, something far more violent than nature alone could provide. The metal, once solid and firm, was now deformed beyond recognition. Could the Fitzgerald have been struck by something, or worse? Could something have been planted inside the ship to cause such devastation? The footage revealed more as the drone moved forward, and what it uncovered next left the team in disbelief. Small pieces of the ship's equipment, once securely bolted to the deck, had been violently ripped from their places. Some parts of the wreckage were scattered yards from where they should have been. This wasn't just an accidental sinking. The ship had been torn apart by an external or internal force, and the damage showed that the destruction was sudden, not gradual. The team could now see the full extent of the devastation. Massive sections of the ship had been violently torn away, and many of the pieces were too far from the wreck to have been swept away by natural forces. This could only mean one thing. Something or someone had caused this damage. The Fitzgerald didn't just sink, it had been blown apart. The drone moved back to the bow, where the damage was still visible. The camera captured a close-up of the dents and cracks, evidence that the ship had endured immense pressure before it went under. This wasn't just stress from waves. It was as if the ship had been crushed from the inside. As the drone hovered over the wreck, the team could see the massive force that had been exerted on the hull. The Fitzgerald was not simply overwhelmed by water. No, something else had caused the ship to break open like an eggshell. Could a rogue wave have been powerful enough to tear apart a ship this large? The theory had always been that waves on Lake Superior had reached monstrous heights, but the footage didn't support this. There was no indication of the type of damage one would expect from a wave slamming into the ship. Instead, the footage showed deep, sharp gouges that looked more like they had been caused by an internal explosion or an attack from the outside. As the drone moved deeper into the wreck, the team focused on the stern, which was more severely damaged than the rest of the ship. The stern had been ripped away from the rest of the vessel, almost like it had been torn off by an immense force. The damage to the stern was so catastrophic that it almost didn't seem possible that it could have been caused by anything other than an explosion. There were signs of burn marks around the broken sections, which only added to the suspicion that something had exploded inside the ship, causing it to break apart. The team moved the drone toward the stern's propellers. The damage was extensive. The propeller, which had once powered the Fitzgerald across the vast expanse of the Great Lakes, was twisted beyond recognition. It was bent at unnatural angles, its blades broken and scattered around the debris field. The damage was too precise to have been caused by a simple mechanical failure. It looked as though the propeller had been deliberately broken, maybe even severed by an outside force. The operator took a deep breath. The evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. The Fitzgerald had not simply fallen victim to a storm. Something or someone had caused this ship to sink. There was no question about it now. The ship had been sabotaged, either by an external force or something from within. This wasn't the work of nature, it was something far darker. As the drone continued its survey, the team tried to make sense of everything they had seen. What caused the Fitzgerald's sudden destruction? Was there a flaw in the ship's design, or had an external force caused the ship to break apart? Could it have been an attack? And if so, who would have had the means, motive, and opportunity to cause this kind of devastation to such a massive vessel? The more the drone uncovered, the more the team began to realize the Fitzgerald had not been the victim of an accident. Something far more deliberate had occurred. The footage from the drone continued to reveal details that left the team on the surface in shock. The wreckage of the Edmund Fitzgerald was not simply the result of a natural disaster. What they were seeing didn't match the official explanation. It wasn't just that the ship had sunk from bad weather. The damage was far worse and far more deliberate. Something had broken the Fitzgerald apart, something violent, something that didn't come from waves or a storm. The footage from the bow was particularly eye-opening. The ship's massive front section, though buried in the lake bed, was still largely intact, but it showed signs of terrible stress. The dents and cracks were more than just natural wear. It looked as though something had forced the ship's structure to bend and break. The hull wasn't simply buckled under pressure. It looked like it had been hit with an immense force. The deep gouges and the way the metal had warped were signs of something more than just a sinking. Something, perhaps even an explosion, had caused the ship to break apart. As the drone moved towards the stern, it became even more apparent that this wasn't a simple case of the ship taking on water and sinking. The stern had been violently torn away from the rest of the ship. The twisted metal and scattered parts on the ocean floor looked like the aftermath of a bomb blast. The team couldn't ignore the fact that the propeller, one of the most important parts of the ship, had been damaged in a way that could only happen if an external force had struck it. The blades were bent, and the metal around the propeller was warped. This damage wasn't the kind you'd see from water pressure. It was deliberate, precise, and far too intense to be caused by waves alone. At this point, the team realized something critical. The Fitzgerald had not been struck by an accidental storm. The damage wasn't consistent with what you'd expect from a ship caught in bad weather. It looked like the ship had been struck not just by a force of nature, but by something intentional, perhaps an explosion or something planted within the ship itself. The footage suggested sabotage. But if the ship had been sabotaged, who would have done it, and why? The camera then zoomed in on the cargo holds, the area that had been blamed in the original investigation for allowing the ship to flood. The theory was that the hatch covers, which were said to have been poorly sealed, allowed water to pour in, eventually sinking the ship. But the footage now told a different story. The hatches were still in place. They hadn't been ripped off. They were secure. This raised the biggest question of all. If the hatches were intact, why did the Fitzgerald break apart so violently? Why did it sink so quickly? The crew had no time to react, no distress signals were sent, and no lifeboats were launched. It didn't make sense. The team reviewed the footage again. It was clear that the ship hadn't been flooded from above. It hadn't simply sunk from water rushing in. The ship had been torn apart from the inside or from some external force. The large pieces of machinery that were scattered yards away from the wreck indicated that something had ripped these parts away from the ship. This wasn't the result of a slow sinking. This was a catastrophic event, of violent destruction. As the drone continued its survey, the team focused on the stern, where the damage was the most severe. The pieces were scattered far and wide, suggesting that the stern had been violently separated from the bow. The deep gouges and burns on the wreckage were almost certainly signs of an explosion. The way the ship had broken apart, combined with the burn marks, pointed directly to the possibility of sabotage. The final piece of the puzzle came when the drone focused on the stern's propellers. The damage here was unmistakable. The blades had been twisted and shattered, something that could only have been caused by an immense external force. The propeller's damage made it clear. The ship had been struck. Something had caused this destruction, and the theory that it was simply waves or bad weather was no longer believable. Now the team was left with one critical realization. The Fitzgerald had not simply fallen victim to bad weather, it had been sabotaged. The damage wasn't random, it was deliberate. Whether from an internal source or an external one, something or someone had caused this ship to break apart. The crew of the Fitzgerald had been caught completely off guard, with no time to send a distress call or abandon ship. They never had a chance. For nearly 50 years, the mystery of the Edmund Fitzgerald had remained unsolved. The official explanation, that it was caused by a storm with faulty hatch covers allowing water to flood the ship, now seemed wrong. The footage from the drone had answered many of the questions that had haunted historians and the families of the lost crew members for decades. The Fitzgerald hadn't just been caught in a storm, it had been struck, torn apart by an unknown force, and sunk in an instant. This wasn't an accident. This was a deliberate act of destruction. The drone's footage left us with one question: who or what was responsible for the Fitzgerald's destruction? Was it a deliberate attack from the inside? Or was it something external, an enemy, or even a hidden force within the crew? While we may never know the full truth, the wreckage has finally begun to speak. The Fitzgerald's tragic end was not just the result of a storm, it was the result of something much darker. What do you think really happened to the Edmund Fitzgerald? Was it sabotage, or do you think there was another explanation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this deep dive into the mystery of the Fitzgerald fascinating, make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this.